In this short presentation, we're going to talk about setting up authentication via LDAP or AD. ITAM provides LDAP support to import all of your user account information from the LDAP server into the Assist ITAM system. We can schedule this import periodically so that user management in Assist ITAM can be controlled through LDAP. We can also define single sign-on so that authentication can happen directly on your LDAP server. We will talk through this live in a video in a few moments, but the presentation will tell us we need to go to Settings and AD and LDAP integration. We add in a name, we add in the profile, we add in the server and its type, and we map the attributes. We define the OUs that will be integrated into the LDAP configuration tab within ITAM. We define the user's role. It's advisable to use user and we'll assign privileges later. What that means is that different people can do different things in ITAM. It's advisable to set everybody at the lowest level first and then by exception allocate the senior users or the administrators administration rights later. So we set everybody up as a user to begin with minimum rights. Once we've defined the OUs, we schedule when we want the sync to happen, either incrementally and or a full sync. We also have to define user roles to determine what each user can have. To do that, we go to Settings and we go to Roles. The system has many default roles set up, but we can create more if necessary. We have the ability to create a role name and determine, as you can see on the slide, whether they can see faults, performance, IT automations. We can give them access to particular modules. We can give them access for remote control, and etc. etc. The one thing we don't need to do in an Assist installation and an Axios installation is at the bottom, Service Desk User Creation Access. We don't need to do that. What we'll do now is talk through the live video of how this gets created. Upon installation, we're going to log in to the Assist ITAM. You'll notice we've got the IP address of the server, and we've got Sapphire IMS/login_page.jsp, and we come into the login screen. There is a login that we can use, which is admin, and a password we can use, which is admin. If you guys are logging into a MSP admin ID and MSP admin password, we click on login. I'm not going to remember my password today, and I get my Axios Assist ITAM, and you'll notice I've now got dashboards appearing, and it's the dashboards of the scan of my machine. You'll notice there is an evaluation period which ends in 2 weeks at the end of March. It tells me I'm logged in as an administrator. The first thing I want to do is to set up some users and some roles. To do that, I click on Settings. When I click on Settings, I get a screen with many icons, and to start with, we're going to go down to the bottom of the screen, or pretty much bottom of the screen, and look at user management. In here we have users, roles, AD and LDAP integration, locations, departments, password recovery, and an Excel export. An ideal way to create the users would be to use Active Directory and LDAP integration. To do this, we click on the AD and LDAP integration button, and it brings up the AD and integrations LDAP configuration. We have rule configuration, LDAP configuration, and attribute settings. If I click on LDAP rule configuration and click on Add, it allows me to configure my LDAP rule name. Now, in this example, I don't have one, but for the guys who do and understand LDAP, we would give it a name. We pick a credential profile, and we'll pick our default one, and we would input the host name or IP address where we're going to get our credentials from. We also determine the protocol type of LDAP, whether we use either Unix or Windows, And we have the ability to map from LDAP. So you can see we can either set defaults and it populates the, shall we call them, popular fields, or if we don't do that, we can manually select the information that we need. So mobile, cell number, office number if I have one, telephone number, email address. So you can notice we could have done the defaults. I've just gone maybe old school and done it manually, but we can input the information. So it's done. I've used telephone number for office number, so we'll leave that last one alone. I click on save. I need a host IP address, so I'm just going to type in 12345 for the minute. I save it. Once again, that would be real. No, so we've now got my LDAP rule. We click on LDAP configuration this time and click on add. This is where we're going to configure LDAP. So what I'm going to do is determine the people I want to bring in and the rule I want to use. So I'm going to call this, for want of argument, LDAP configuration. We can determine when we import our users into which particular role we want to import them. So notice we've got master admin. This gives these people full rights. We also have inventory users, we have users. So depending on who we want to use the system, we can determine what privileges they have. Bearing in mind that the people who need to have to use this particular tool, most would need to have admin rights because they are administrators. This is not a tool for end user staff. So in this example, I'm actually going to pick user because if I do bring everybody in, it'll bring him in as user, and then by exception, I'm going to set the master admins that I want to set. Because I do want to use the LDAP rule I created a few moments ago to bring everybody through. The organizational unit I want to bring through from is going to be a list, or again, it could have been a custom. For the moment, I click on save. I've now configured my LDAP configuration to suck through the most relevant rule. Notice I get an error because in my database, I don't have LDAP set up. That's not a major issue because momentarily we will manually create our users so you can see how that happens. For the moment, I click on cancel. You'll notice the last tab on here is LDAP attribute settings. It's totally irrelevant to what we need to do, therefore we don't have to go there or do anything about it. What I am going to do though is go back to settings. When I go back to settings, I'm going to straight back down to where I was a moment ago. We've discussed AD and LDAP. I want to talk about roles. So when I click on roles, this enables us to either use the roles that exist, and as I mentioned, master admin has full rights and various other roles have different privileges. To add in a new one, I click on add. If I wanted to have an assist role or an administrator role or a particularly named role, I have the ability to create one. So I'm going to call one example. Now, invariably, we don't really have to do this, but I want to show you that you can. I can determine what privileges I want this particular user to see. I also have the option, as you can see, of fault, performance, etc., and settings. So I have the ability to allow certain people to see certain things. As I said earlier, I want to show you that you can do this, but it doesn't have to be done because the roles we have are perfectly adequate. What I'm going to do there is cancel because I don't need to go any further. We don't need to create any new ones. Having done that, I go back to settings. And lastly, what I'm going to do is go down to users, and I'm going to create a user who's able to log into that system. You'll notice here we have admin, AMC user, Jason, MSP admin, MSP engineer, MSP manager, Rick W. Some people are in the database already, which is fantastic. What I want to do is add in one more user. So I'm going to click on add, and I'm going to add in myself. I could have an email address. These fields are not mandatory, so for ease of use today I'm not going to bother. My ID will be Alan. My password will be a very weak password of one letter, but I re-enter my password again. I do not want to block the user. I don't need to have a wing. I don't need a department. It's not mandatory. I don't need a manager. But what I do want to do is to pick the most relevant access type, and for me as an administrator will be master admin. So I select it, I save it. This user of Alan has now been created, and there he is. To prove this works, let's log out completely. Let's log back in again using Alan and my easy password, and I'm in with full access rights.